So we're just going to chat along?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Today is October 17th, 2012, and I'm at the Robert F. Kidd Library speaking with Mr. Rick Sypolt. Could you please give me your full name as is recorded on your birth certificate, sir?
It's Charles Richard Sypolt.
Okay. Do you currently or have you ever had a nickname?
Yes, it's currently Rick.
Okay. Any other nicknames throughout your life?
Nothing that I would want to report on or acknowledge anyway.
Okay. Where were you born and raised, sir?
I was raised in Preston County, a little place called Rollsburg, West Virginia, or just outside of Rollsburg. I grew up there on a farm, and then attended high school there at Rollsburg High.
Okay. Were you born at home? Do you know?
I think I was one of the children that was born at the current new hospital at Kingwood, West Virginia.
Okay.
And I think I was the first child, and we had a total of 10 children. First child died, and there was 7 boys, and there was 3 girls, and now there's 2 girls that were in the family. So 9 children survived, and we grew up there, and like I said, on the farm, and just had a good rural background.
Mm-hmm. Was there a wide range of age groups?
No, back in those days there wasn't the contraceptives of today, and so I know my mother complained one time it seemed like that every year or two she was having a child, and so there wasn't a wide range. There was a year or two between all the children. And between my next brother up, I happened to be the youngest boy in the family, and my older brother is only about 9 months older than I am.
Okay. What were some of the things that took place on your farm?
Oh, just everything from, it was just a small cattle farm, subsistence type farm. We had chickens, we had a couple hogs, had a couple milk cows that we would milk, and then with the rest of them in there were beef cattle. So we grew our own garden, made our own hay. We had a team of horses that we worked when we were young, and so we used regular machinery in there, you know, associated with those. And then in the off season, usually in the fall, we'd do a little bit of timber harvesting, do a little bit of logging there with the team of horses.
Oh, I see. Did you sell the timber? Or did you use it and sell it?
Well, we used a little bit of the timber, but most of it was sold. Some of it we had sawed and brought back to the farm to make construction there for barns and that type of thing, or just general construction. But most of the stuff in there we tried to sell as mine props for the smaller stuff, and then some logs for the bigger material.
Did you sell much of the beef that you raised?
No, most of that was consumed by the family. With the number of children, most time when I was growing up, we had 4 boys at home. So by the time you fed the family, there wasn't too much left. We usually sold the calves in the fall, and then we would replenish a cow or 2 each year. So we usually kept about 10 head of cattle, 2 horses through the winter.
And you had electricity, correct? And
I can still remember when we put electricity in the barn, and almost remember when it was put into the house. I was very young, probably only about 3 years old when they put electricity into the house.
Okay. Did you had refrigeration?
Yes. Yes, most time when I was growing up, we'd already had refrigeration, so not a problem there. But we canned about everything, and I can still remember that we butchered the hogs and we salted down the hams like they did in those days. I guess they would call it sugar cured, but where you take the ham, salt them down, put them out, let them dry, and then just when you needed a piece of ham, you just went out to the granary in our case, and just slabbed off a piece of ham and brought it on in for dinner or whatever.
Okay. Is there any specific stories or memories of your childhood that you'd like to share that you can think of?
Well, probably most of the memories occurred during the winter time. We manufactured a couple of skis, made our homemade set of skis, had our own homemade sleds and those type of things, but as a high school student, probably between about the 9th and 12th grade, we skied from the house down to the bus stop. It was a mile walk if you cut overland. If you took the road, it was a little bit longer than that. But that's how we learned how to ski, was out there skiing through the pasture fields, trying to avoid the fences, and also skiing to school. But I still remember the walks to and from school in there very vividly, and catching the school bus, and in the wintertime being pretty cold a lot of days. When by the time I got to the bus, coming back home, coming uphill, of course, was you got a little bit warmer.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have to wait then coming on up, but we would walk down normally, and those are Preston County winters that were pretty rugged winters.
And you spent a whole lot of time with your brothers out doing these things?
Oh yeah, yeah, working together and playing together and everything. And so we grew up very much in there as a real tight-knit family.
Mm-hmm.
Mom and Dad were just super excellent
Mm-hmm.
to us. So it was a very nice family in there to grow up.
Did they, were your mother or father employed in anything other than the farm?
Yeah, Dad worked for many years at Alpha Portland Cement, which was up along Rollsburg area.
Mm-hmm.
And had a pretty good job there, and then that shut down, and then he tried a couple other things, and eventually worked on a sawmill his last few years before he retired.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you said, as you mentioned before, you had attended school there in Preston County. You went up through, did you start in what, first grade at that time?
First grade all the way through 12th grade. It was all in one school.
But it was it separated, rooms were separated?
Yeah, the rooms were separated.
Okay.
So for the first 6th grade, you stayed in the same room, and may have, can't remember, 7th, 8th grade, I think we changed rooms.
Oh, I see. Okay, so for the first 6 years, you were actually in with
Yeah, you stayed with the same teacher in the same
Mm-hmm.
classroom.
Oh, I see.
So that teacher taught you history, English, math, whatever.
Mm-hmm. But you were actually in the same structure, same building, your entire...
Whole entire time.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? I mean, your actual education, early education.
Well, I got an excellent education coming out of a school of that nature. Our class, I think, had 32 seniors. So the classes were relatively small. They were able to offer math up through algebra and geometry. And I even took a kind of an extra course in trigonometry, which was kind of unheard of in those days,
Mm-hmm.
back in the 60s, particularly for a small school like that. But really, I think that was probably the best education system I could have come out of, because we knew each other. A lot of us kids had run around together, farmed together, very close-knit group, and kind of taught us to look out for each other and that kind of thing. So I thought the education I got was just a real excellent education, even though it was small and by today's standards, a lot of people probably think wasn't a good education, but we had real good teachers and overall, and we were able to do a lot of things that wouldn't have been able to do in a larger school. I was in thespians.
Mm-hmm.
I played a little bit on the basketball team, went out in my sophomore year, and then I didn't stay on the team in there anytime during my senior year. Went out for it, but didn't stay on it. But it allowed us to do a lot of things that probably a lot of other kids don't get to do in high school, because I probably wasn't talented enough to make a basketball team in a larger school, but I could make it there, and I could be in thespians, honor society, those type of things, which I think was a real benefit to me.
As you were getting closer to graduating high school, did you have any thoughts about what you wanted to do?
Well, like a lot of high school seniors, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and even the idea of going to college didn't really dawn on me early on. My brother Robert had started at Alderson Broadus a year ahead of me, and like I say, he was just 1 year ahead. So when I come there to graduation, it seemed like the end thing there to do if you had reasonable intelligence was that you told people you wanted to go off to college, and that kind of let people, they sort of just kind of left you alone then, because they weren't sure what you'd ever do at college.
Mm-hmm.
But that you're going off to college, so you'd be just fine and dandy. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to go into in college. So I started off in agricultural engineering.
Oh, where at?
WVU.
Okay.
And that was 1964 after I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
And then I quickly changed into wildlife management. Didn't think that had much of a future, so then I changed into forest management. So for the first 2 years I was at Morgantown, and I'd changed majors at least twice and going into forest management.
Mm-hmm.
I seemed to like it much better.
Okay. Were you in college at the time that you enlisted in the military?
Well, the truth of the matter is I really didn't enlist in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in East Chicago, Indiana, in the steel mills in the summer, trying to earn enough money to go back to school in the fall when I got my draft notice. In those days, if you didn't have a 2.0 average, they wouldn't put you on probation. They had the draft going at that time. If you fell below a 2.0 average, then they would go ahead and draft you, no matter what, unless you had a physical disability. And at that time in there, I certainly didn't. And so they just sent me my draft notice, and rather than appealing it or anything, I just went ahead and showed up for my physical to go ahead and go into the military then, and I believe it was in September of
Are you saying that
66.
you should not have received the draft notice, though?
Oh, no, I should have.
Oh, I see.
Because I had less than a 2.0 average. I had a 197,
Uh-huh.
3/100ths of a point off.
Uh-huh.
So I'd say in those days my luck really wasn't too good. It wasn't on my side.
Uh-huh.
But I'd honestly earned that. I had not done well in college.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I much deserved it. It was quite right that they sent me one. And at that point in my life, probably better off that was the direction that I went, rather than coming back in there to school as I look back on it.
Mm-hmm. So you took a hiatus from your education for a little while?
For 2 years.
Okay.
Got to spend it there with Uncle Sam, who treated me pretty well.
Okay.
And so I really didn't have any complaints about that. And so I went ahead. They gave me the opportunity to enlist. I could sign up for 3 years, or I could just go and be inducted in the Army, drafted to do 2 years. So I selected the 2 years, and at one time I entertained going airborne when I was first was drafted, and we had that option up through basic.
What did you think of your basic training?
It was pretty tough, but I was coming out of the steel mills, and a lot of days in there it was up in the upper 90s, 100s, working with hot iron going by you and that kind of stuff. So it was pretty warm in the summertime in East Chicago, Indiana.
Yes.
And so I was pretty lean at that point. I was about 6'1" in height, and I was 130 pounds. But there wasn't any fat on me, and I was used to work and hard work. I doubled over a lot of the shifts. It was as a laborer out there, so I doubled on over, which meant I worked 8 hours and then just stay for another 8. So I'd do that 2 or 3 times a week, trying to earn money, to get back to college.
Stepping back, how did you end up in the steel mill? How did you know about that summer employment?
A couple friends of ours at Rollsburg had gone out there the previous summer.
Oh, I see.
So they said, well, why don't you come on out and work in the steel mills? And my dad didn't think it was a real great idea, didn't think it would be all that safe. And but everybody looked out after me. I was just a young kid, and I was willing here to work, and the boss I had in there was very appreciative of that. And so I showed up every day and worked hard, and things went along very well. And when I left there, he told me if I got out of the military and wanted to come back, there'd be a position there for me.
Okay. Had your father been in the military?
No, he had his arm hurt before World War II, and so he wasn't inducted into the military.
Did your parents have any thoughts about when you were joining up? They have much to say to you about it?
Not a whole lot. I'm sure Mom was very concerned, as per normal. This was during the period 1966, and Vietnam was probably at one of its peaks, and a very turbulent time. The military wasn't looked on with the greatest of favor by a lot of people. I'd had two immediate older brothers. Well, I had one brother served in Korea, and another brother that served after Korea. Didn't do real well in the military, but survived through it. And then I had two older brothers. I have the second brother up is Bob, and then there's Clyde and Cecil. And the two of those are going into the Air Force. So we'd had some military experience in the family, and so it wasn't anything too unusual.
Okay. So you went through basic with really not a whole lot of trouble.
No, I didn't have a whole lot of trouble, and I've been through ROTC at Morgantown. In your first 2 years at university at that time, you had to take ROTC. So I knew what left and right were, and how to march. So that wasn't a real problem, but I didn't bother telling the Army that, because the first thing I heard about the military is when you go into basic, don't volunteer for anything. So basically I didn't. If you didn't know how, they'd make you a squad leader or something like that, and that's just not a very good position there to be in. So I just sort of wanted to be in the middle of the crowd, cruise my way through it, and I did real well in it.
Nothing really surprised you?
I shot expert in a rifle. Physical training wasn't too much of a problem. When I sat down there to eat, in basic, a lot of time they'd have 2-minute drills, which when time you sit down till you emptied your plate, you had 2 minutes to eat. Whatever you wanted to eat, however you wanted to eat it, you had 2 minutes. When that was done, there would be a drill sergeant come by, and he'd say that you were done. Whatever you didn't have eaten, you put down your fork, you took the stuff home and threw it in the garbage can. And a lot of the bigger guys who were a little bit overweight, they'd let them only eat there maybe for a minute. Guys like me, going through the line every so often, they just tell the cook there, give this guy extra mashed potatoes or whatever. And even when they was coming around telling other people to dump their food in the trash can, the sergeant said, "Oh no, you sit down there, buddy, and you eat." So there was some advantages being pretty lean and mean at that point in time. But no, I remember one day that I had to do 60 push-ups. I didn't button a button. My gig line wasn't straight. The shirt, the belt, the pants wasn't all straight. So every time I turned around, I ran to a drill sergeant, and he'd find something, and I was down knocking out 20 push-ups. And I remember that one day I did 60. I was starting to get a little bit tired after 60 push-ups, but as far as the physical part, that wasn't too awful tough. They'd let us sleep in till 6 o'clock or so in the morning. So it wasn't too awful bad. I'd been used to getting up on the farm and up in the steel mills. So if they woke me up, at 5 o'clock in the morning, it wasn't any big deal. The biggest problem was probably living in tents about September, October, and down there in Fort Gordon, Georgia. It got a little nippy in the mornings. But no, it wasn't too awful tough or basic for me anyway.
Okay.
Just being away from home in there was probably the worst.
All right. Well, how did the rest of your military service pan out? You were in the Army, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
we were in the Army, and we went ahead and we, as I mentioned there, we spent our basic. I was inducted in South Carolina, Fort Jackson, and then they shipped us on to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and so we got through that all right. And I remember being posted up on the wall. They come on out and they tell you what your MOS is going to be. That's your job for the next 2 years. Well, 91E30 is a medic, and I realized that I really didn't want to be a medic, because the second guy that they usually shot in Vietnam was the medic. They try to kill the captain first. The second guy was a guy with a big red star on his hat. Because they knew if they killed the captain, that would disable the leadership. If they killed the medic, that would be the equivalent of killing 2 or 3 other people, because then nobody else would have medical help. So mine was a 91 E20.
Okay.
So I knew it wasn't a medic, but I was in the medical field and I couldn't figure out what in the world that was. And finally somebody told me, it's going to be a dental assistant. Now I didn't know anything about being a dental assistant. The only relationship I could think of that the military would even judge was when I was in school, trees had roots, you know, and I was in forestry school, teeth have roots, so obviously they probably made the connection, being, you know, military intelligence, they probably figured out that I ought to be a dental assistant.
Uh-huh.
The truth of the matter was that there was a whole group of us that came through at that point in time and graduated. They just happened to need dental assistants at that time.
I see.
It was strange how they assigned you. If they needed 30 cooks, the next group that came through basic, you're going to be cooks.
Uh-huh.
You know, they didn't worry too much about your skills or dexterity or much of anything else, intelligence or whatever.
It just worked that way.
It just worked that way.
Uh-huh.
So they shipped me back to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I spent the rest of my time at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And really kind of a cushy type situation compared to what a lot of people had, because like I say, it was 1966. A lot of those guys, they were packing up and shipping to Vietnam.
Was there still that potential with being, you know, with that?
Yeah, there was.
assignment?
And as long as you had 13 months left, they could deploy you. That was their standard time frame.
Mm-hmm.
If you had less than 13 months, they probably wouldn't ship you overseas because it wasn't justifying their cost
Mm-hmm.
to do that.
So you knew you were in the clear once you got to a certain time period?
After I got under 13 months, actually I knew it before that, because after I was there for, I don't know, about 3 months, I mentioned to my colonel that was over our clinic that I'd thought about, you know, applying for a tour in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at that age, maybe you're not the sharpest that you've ever been in. And so I just thought, well, I haven't been to Vietnam, you know, maybe I just put in there for tour of duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so the colonel said, Rick, you're not going anywhere. You're going to be here. So I knew at that point in time, any paperwork I shipped up, it'd sort of get lost or just be bypassed or whatever.
Is there a way you can describe, you know, any more about your feelings about wanting to go?
No, it was just a lot of people when they were going. It was kind of, I guess, the thing in there to do if you were in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I was trained, you know, reasonably well as you can be trained there for that kind of combat. And I just wasn't probably smart enough in there to just kind of sit on the sidelines and kind of watch it go by.
Have you may have felt you weren't being utilized to your fullest potential?
Yeah, more than likely, yeah. We had on-the-job training. We weren't really trained other than on the job, and you had somebody else train you as you went along.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the military system's a little bit different than the civilian system, in which, you know, if you can do a job, you just do it. You don't have to have a PhD in that in order to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have any end quote credentials.
Mm-hmm.
And I did pretty well at that. I attained the rank of Specialist 5, Spec 5, in I don't know, a few months in there that I was there, which is unusual in there for a 2-year person coming into the military. Usually you don't make more than E4 at best. A lot of people didn't make E3.
Mm-hmm.
But I made it up to E5, had done really well. I don't know if it's because of my college education. We had several tests as well as the actual practical work, and so I did real well on those, but I was used to taking tests, being in the college system and such.
Mm-hmm.
And I had reasonable intelligence, so it wasn't too awful tough in there to do well on their military tests. So I rose in rank pretty quickly, and it was a good job and fulfilling in a lot of ways. We were preparing some of the Special Forces guys for their tours in Vietnam. We were fixing up guys who had come back from Vietnam and gotten injured for facial, dental type work in there for them, because there wasn't any hesitation from any of the any of the doctors on anything that a vet needed when he came back. Whatever they needed, they tried to do for him. I know there may have been reports there, you know, of hospitals and stuff not treating vets well. When they came back to Ireland Army Hospital at Fort Knox, those guys were treated as well as anybody could be treated. They were given good food, the best of medical and everything else that they could get, and the special forces that we trained for going on over, they were trained as well as they could. They had to rotate in the operating room. They had to come through and do emergency extractions, because once they got dropped off, I think there were a 16-man team, and they all had their specialties, whether it was demolition or medical or whatever. But if the medical guy got killed, somebody else would have to step in. If a guy got a toothache in the field, somebody had to take it out. You know, so those guys were all cross-trained, and they were very sharp and well-trained individuals. I was pretty impressed by it.
Okay. As you brought up, and of course, I mean, it's evident that that time was a very turbulent time in America's history in a lot of ways. And as you mentioned, there was, you know, probably not only in the civilian population, in the military, there was some dissentment, I would say, too.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain your feelings about all that then, and how it may have changed, or how you feel about it now, or?
I think all the time that I was on leave, I don't think I ever wore a uniform once. You see a lot of guys now in the airport and stuff, and they have on their uniforms. I don't think I ever wore my uniform off base once. And it wasn't that I feared for me or anything. It's just that a lot of people didn't like the war at that time. And there's good reasons for it. My Lai massacre and a lot of other things there we didn't do real well. So during that time, I just went ahead and served, and but I didn't broadcast, you know, that I was a veteran. And there was a lot of people that appreciated it. The people at home certainly appreciated it. But there was also a lot of people that was definitely against the war and would do anything that they could to go against the war. And they certainly had their opinions, and some of the medics that we had were conscientious objectors. They didn't want to carry a rifle, and probably rightfully so. But unfortunately, some of those people they made into medics, and they ended up in battle anyway. It was probably the worst place in there to be a medic. It'd either be a lieutenant or a captain out there. Or
When you say some of them were sent, and they were, even after they were sent overseas, they were they performed their job duties, but they refused to carry a weapon?
Yeah. Yeah, we had conscientious objectors in there. There weren't many in there, but, you know, they were respected because they still did their job. And I know a lot of the medics in there, well, at least understood a lot of the medics. Some of them carried pistols and stuff anyway, but you can't carry a rifle and all the medical stuff in there you need to carry. So a lot of those guys didn't carry rifles, or at least that was my knowledge of what was going on at that time, or you know, was told to us.
Okay. Well, what happened when you finally knew that your time in the military was coming up? Had you considered staying in, or?
I considered it shortly, but I was too much of a free spirit, I guess, at that time. I wanted my time there to be mine. I didn't want anybody to tell me when I had to get up, when I had to go to bed, or what I was going to do the next day. They treated me extremely well, fed me well. We ate in the cafeteria at the hospital and everything. Good food. So we went on in and discussed it, and I told the sergeant that I didn't think I'd be staying. I was going to go back to college and finish my college education, and he said, well, I think it's a smart thing you're 4 years to do. So that's what I did. I applied for an early out so I could get back to college in time to start the fall semester at WVU, and so that's what I did.
Okay. Were you able to start using the GI Bill at that time? Was that available?
Yeah, it was available, and it was a very good thing ever for me. And coming from a rural background, didn't have a lot of money. And coming out of the military, I think my first pay as a private was $60 a month. It was a little more than that when I got out, maybe $225 or something. But you know, hadn't saved up a huge amount of money, so it was very beneficial for me. And so I used it in the 2 years or so that I got my bachelor's, and then I stayed on and got my master's.
And you got your master's at WVU also?
Yes. And so I finished it in about 1 year and 9 months, which usually takes about 2 years. But again, I was kind of a restless individual, and I like to get things accomplished, so I finished it early.
Mm-hmm.
And but it helped pay all the way up through the master's degree.
Okay.
And so it was extremely beneficial to me.
And you got your bachelor's in?
I got it in forest management, and then I turned around and stayed and got a master's in forest hydrology.
Okay. And upon graduating with your master's degree, what was your plans?
Well, I didn't have any real great plans at that point in time as what I was going there to do, so another graduate and I, he was from Preston County also, we decided we'd start a business in tree removal and shrubbery and landscaping and that type of thing. So I worked at that for about 1 year, and then I'd roommated with Mr. Ed Grafton's brother, and he was the director up here, the chairman in the Land Resources Department as we know it now. And he knew that I had finished that, and I had some surveying background, and so there was a position coming.
Mr. Grafton's brother was?
Mr. Grafton's brother, yeah, he was in forestry also. He has about 2 or 3 brothers that are in forestry agriculture. That whole family is I guess attached to WVU. His brother Bill stayed at WVU and was an extension expert for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Passed away a year or so ago. His brother up in Elkins was with the Forest Service and retired from there.
Mm-hmm.
His brother Alan, who was my age, we worked together on forestry projects, and he's now in Oklahoma. So the Grafton family, I knew them, and Ed was my advisor when I went to college. And I always insist to this day, that's the reason why I didn't do well the first 2 years, was because he was my advisor. But he strongly denies that, by the way. And he's absolutely right. I was a bit of a wild Mustang and just needed a little taming down there before it ever became useful to much anybody, I think. But I suppose today a kid like myself, they'd probably have him on 4 or 5 drugs, if they prescription drugs in there to calm them down to them. But always had a lot of energy and that type of thing. But it served me well later on in life.
Mm-hmm.
But then Ed stopped by and asked me if I'd like to take a teaching position down here for 1 year. So I accepted that.
And you were saying Ed's brother was working down here?
No, Ed's brother and I worked together up at Morgantown.
Oh, I see. And Ed was working.
Yeah, Ed was the department chair down here.
Okay.
But his brother Alan and I.
And you'd previously known him, he was working at WVU?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was my advisor, and he was teaching some classes at WVU, and then he went to Africa, and I went to the Army, and so then he came here he went to Iowa State and then came here, and then I eventually came here and got to work there with him for another 30-some years.
Okay. How was that transition? I mean, you were in the field. You'd been in that field for several years. You'd even had, growing up, as you'd mentioned, you'd had some experience in that type of thing. How did you feel about that transition moving into education?
It was a big change for this boy. It was a big change. I got along well in there with the students, so that wasn't a problem. And in order to be a good instructor, you have to care about your students, so that wasn't a big problem either. So I got along with them, I cared for them. And probably the third ingredient, you just have to be a little bit mean.
Mm-hmm.
There's a time when you have to have discipline, there's a time when you have to have, you can let discipline go, and you can be with the group, particularly guys in forestry and survey,
Mm-hmm.
an outdoor group anyway. And so I thought, you know, things in there would go pretty well, and they did. It was a big transition. I'd gotten married about a year before that, so my son and wife and I bought a trailer out here on a farm, and we moved to Gilmer County. Didn't have any electricity for about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
or gas for heat. And so we camped out for basically 3 months, and starting school, it was a big transition.
Okay. Have you remained in living in Gilmer County since that time?
Yes,
And that would have been, when was you hired?
1973.
Okay. So, could you elaborate and talk a little bit more about that? I mean, about, you know, you've been here for a good while now, it's 2012. Just the changes over the years, just anything at all that has affected you?
Well, I still remember the first year, particularly in the surveying, about half those guys are Vietnam vets.
Mm-hmm.
I was maybe half a year, 2 years older than most of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them had been out and worked construction, that kind of stuff, so they were a pretty rough bunch.
They were pretty much first year college students though, even
Yeah.
though they were aged a little bit older than most.
Right. Some of them had been in the military, and I remember vividly in there, my first year, a couple of the vets decided to get into fisticuffs in the classroom, well, in an outdoor lab classroom type situation. And my training in the military was that you never intervene into a fight, because it's usually the guy that intervenes gets a broken jaw, and then you end up in the dental section of the hospital. So, so knowing that, I just let them finish it off, and then once it got done, I asked them if they were finished, if we could go in their class, and they said yes. As it turned out, you know, they come back the next day and apologized for disrupting class, and wanted to know if I'd leave them in class, and I hadn't considered throwing them out of class even. I figured if they got in a fight, that was their business, as long as there was no blood. It didn't hurt anything.
And you probably were a little lenient seeing how they were just back from Vietnam.
Yeah. There was some guys with some problems that had come back, and there were some definite personalities in that class that clashed. But we got along all right and got through class, and they were appreciative of the extra work in there, the extra time there that I spent there with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked out really well. I'm still friends with most of that group in there, still around.
Did both those boys end up doing fine after that? Did you get any more problems?
No, not a bit of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Not a bit of problems. Well, I told them if there was any problems, I'd just remove them from the class. And so them knowing that, and that they'd gotten it all out of their system. Neither one were very good at fighting anyway, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
So we got that over with. But I've just had the pleasure of having a lot of good students. Large proportion of students come from rural backgrounds. Some of them are first-time college participants. Most of them have some desire to be outside or doing things there, you know, with their hands, or combining, you know, the intellectual things with actually getting projects accomplished. And so it's been a very, very pleasurable situation. Students have always been good.
Do you think there's any difference between the kids that go to WVU for the same type of thing and the ones that come here?
Yeah, there probably is. Those kids are probably a little bit better off financially. Interestingly, you asked that we were on a field trip yesterday, and one of the people that were giving the field trip had mentioned that the WVU group was pretty disruptive, talking while the lecturer was talking and that type of thing, carrying on their own conversation, doing their own thing, and apparently the instructor was there with them and allowed it. And so I assured her that it wouldn't happen with my class. If there was any problem, she could take care of it, or I'd take care of it, one way or the other. You just can't be disrespectful.
Oh, so I see.
And so I think, yeah, there's a difference between them, and it may just be because of that instructor too. I've got both of my degrees from WVU, and that education served me pretty well. But I really got my education when I started teaching. Finally realized how much I didn't know. You know, they say a high school senior knows everything until they go off to college, and then gradually they realize that they don't know everything. Well, I guess at the end of college I still thought I knew a good bit. And I was pretty humbled by the first classes. There was a lot of work and a lot of things I didn't know, a lot of preparation. But now the students at Glenville State, I think, are just top notch. Don't have a bit of problem with them.
You think the main difference would be, you know, financial background?
Financial background, probably. They get a lot of out-of-state students. And maybe their culture in there is a little bit different than kids coming from West Virginia, mainly, you know, rural type background. I know even when I was in college up in there, we had guys from Baltimore that wouldn't know a pine tree from an oak. You know, it's almost that bad. But, and then for them trying to learn versus someone who's been outdoors most of their lives and thinks of the outdoors, you know, as just another place in there to go rather than some place once it turns dark, it's all of a sudden an enemy and all these strange creatures come out. Most of us, I think, that grew up from rural backgrounds and stuff just become more affiliated with the land.
Do you think that, would you say that it's been easier as a teacher to teach the West Virginia students?
No, it's probably an even mixture. The out-of-state students, I've had bright ones there. I've had Australian. I've had a guy from England. It all depends upon the individual. They're all such a varied mix, each of them being individuals. I wouldn't want to stereotype by saying, you know, one's easier than the other.
Okay, just a mix, just like any other.
It's just a mix like any others, and the main thing our students is that you just have to tell them what you expect, and then they'll respond to it. If they don't, you punish them by poor grades or whatever, or give them encouragement, whatever it takes to help them out and for them to do, you know, a satisfactory job.
Okay. Feel free not to answer this if you don't want to, but I know you don't want to pinpoint certain people maybe, but I was kind of wondering, is there any of your students that have stood out to you over the years? Anything that's...
Well, usually you remember the excellent students and the really bad ones. Those are probably the two groups that stand out the most. But I've had so many good students, I can't think of one. And like I said, they all have their strong points and they all have their weak points. And a lot of our students that have graduated with B's and C's have gone on to do just excellent work, being very productive, obtain promotions in their field. And then you've had some A students that haven't done quite as well. Attitude problems or whatever, not being able to deal with people, those type of things. So, but the main ones stick out are probably the real good ones and the real bad ones that you'd like to forget about maybe.
Okay. Do you believe that there's a high percentage of your graduates in your field that remain in West Virginia?
Yes. It's hard for employers from outside of West Virginia to employ our students. We've had a lot of people when the housing industry and things that were booming in Virginia and New York and up through the whole East Coast, and you know that they were begging for surveyors and some were for foresters and stuff. But our students have an affinity for West Virginia, and you may get them out of them, and they may work there for 30 years someplace else. But about everybody comes home, it seems like. And usually, most of them think the sooner the better.
You think that attitude just comes from their personality type? And I mean, they're in the field for a reason, because most of them love the outside and have experienced, you know, possibly hunting and different things in this area.
It's that and family, affiliation for the land. I knew when I got through basic training, left Georgia, started coming up through North Carolina, started seeing the mountains, I knew it was home. Didn't have to be in West Virginia. just as back in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something about mountain people, whether they're from Tennessee, New Hampshire, or West Virginia, that just there's an affinity for that type of climate, the hills, the hunting. I don't know what all is entwined in that family,
Mm-hmm.
but there's something that you just can't pull people from the mountains, away from the mountains. I suspect the same way if you grew up in the cornfields of Indiana
Mm-hmm.
or Iowa. Going home would mean that you'd walk down through the cornfields
Mm-hmm.
or the wheat fields of North Dakota. But the kids who grew up in West Virginia, I'd say about 95% of them want to stay in the state.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you made use of any of the VA services?
No, not really.
Okay.
Not really. We've had good insurance, and that type of thing, so basically I haven't.
But it's there if you ever
It's there if I ever need it. And one of my brothers is using it fairly extensively because he doesn't have other insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only safety net he really has. So I think they're very valuable services.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I don't have to use them, it isn't because I don't want to use them, it's the fact that I don't have to allows other people that probably need it worse
Mm-hmm.
than I do to use them.
Okay. Looking back, specifically I'm talking about your military service, but just life in general, I mean, is there anything that stands out that you would have done differently? I mean, would you have maybe stayed in the military longer looking back, or do you think you made the right decision, or?
I think for me it was the right decision. I have two grandsons. One of them's in the Air Force in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is in the reserves and going to school in Morgantown. And for both those boys, I think the military has been good. I think the military, for the majority of the people that went into it, was probably a good thing. Going in
Mm-hmm.
during a Vietnam era or Afghanistan and spending tours over there, I'm not sure that's extremely productive.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of young people that need some sort of structure in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And the military can certainly provide that.
Okay. As you mentioned, you started here at Glenville State College in the 70s, and you're still here in 2012. Do you feel that I mean, obviously your career will be wrapping up in the next few years. Is there anything else you'd like that I didn't ask you, or anything you'd like to say about that, about your time here?
Probably I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I've got to work with some excellent people, great staff, good students, and it's just, it's been a great ride.
Do you feel that the program has either maintained or gotten better over the years?
I think it's maintained the quality. We turned out good students. They were a lot differently trained in the 70s when I came here than they are today.
Mm-hmm. Because of technology?
Yeah, primarily technology.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the biggest difference that I see between times then and now. But we still have an excellent employment rate. The employers are happy with their students, and that's the ultimate assessment that you can do for a college program.
Mm-hmm.
People are getting jobs, or if they're doing well even outside their disciplines. We have a lot of students that in the past have been foresters or surveyors, now landmen, environmental science, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They go outside their field, but yet they're still good employees, and they do well in society.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is that they've matured, and for all students that's a good thing. Military, you had to spend 2 years somewhere maturing, and just well spend it there,
Mm-hmm.
rather than coming here to college probably for a lot of students.
Mm-hmm.
And I think today it would be very valuable if students did a year or 2 years of national service. It could be Peace Corps, VISTA, whatever programs are out there could be the active military. But I think for a lot of students at age 18, like myself, it would have been nice probably to have done something else for a year or so rather than go straight to college.
Okay. Well, you've kind of answered my next question. Basically, I was going to ask you, do you have any advice for young people today, or possibly thinking about the military, or even young people that are in the military right now?
Well, the only advice I have for young people is the same advice a pastor gave in there to us when we were getting married, my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of looked at it as him interfering in our life, but it was the best advice I ever got. It says there's 3 areas in which that you need to keep squared away in your life, basically. One of them is financial, and you need to have that squared away. Keep your finances, don't get too far in debt. One of them in there is your sex life,
mm-hmm.
but you have to have that. You have to have a compatible person, and you have to respect those people. And then the third one there was religion. You have to be somewhat squared away in your religion. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, whatever you believe, you need to have that area of your life squared away and find out where you're at in that.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you keep those 3 areas squared away, you're in pretty good shape.
Okay. Is there anything that you'd like to add that I haven't asked, or that you were thinking about, or that I may have missed?
No, I think about everything there has been covered. I didn't serve, overseas. I didn't go to Vietnam, but I did my time. I served where I could, mm-hmm. help those that I could, and hopefully in some small fashion helped out the military, because they certainly helped me out.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking part in this project, and I especially want to thank you for your service to the country, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That wasn't too awful painful.